Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this public hearing on our report on the application of the European Research Network model in European cross-border health cooperation outside, beyond the rare disease area. And this is an opportunity for you as organisations representing a wide range of interests in the European Union to present your feedback on our report, which hopefully you've all had a chance to read on the web. And we will be listening to you. We don't propose to engage in a debate in it. We are in listening mode. And we will be taking careful notes of everything that you have to say and seeing if there's anything that we need to incorporate as we move towards the final publication. The meeting will be web streamed. You should be aware. In case you want to say anything that you don't want to go outside this room, I'm afraid it will go outside this room to the wider world. And if you missed the scintillating occasion that we had the other day, 2 weeks ago, on vaccination, that was also web streamed and is available on the expert panel's website. So forget about Netflix, forget about all the other things you can look at. We have the most exciting sessions available on the internet for you to watch, much better than YouTube or anything like that. So my name is Martin McKee, and I've been chairing the working group on this particular opinion. And the work has been done by members of that working group, and I'd like to introduce a number of them, and perhaps as I introduce them, they could stand up. Ales Burek is from Prague. Lubov Maroskin is from Vilnius. Dion Kringos from Amsterdam. Lasse Lahtinen from Helsinki. And on my left, Jan de Mazener, who is the chair of the overall panel, who is from Ghent. Sabina Nuti is from Pisa. Walter Ricciardi, on my immediate left, is from Rome. And I sometimes live in London. Although I may be looking for exile, political asylum fairly soon. But leaving that aside, I'd like to now move on to the presentation of the draft report. And it's a great pleasure to introduce one of the two rapporteurs, who are Sabina and Walter. And this time, Walter will be presenting to you the report of our deliberations. Walter, please.
So, what we have been asked? We have been asked to analyze the following question. First, what are the areas that can benefit most from the ERN model of cross-border cooperation? Second, should the ERN model be used as a whole, covering diagnosis and treatment research, training, knowledge generation, etc., or only include specific models of collaborations? And third, how would national health system integrate such networks into their national framework? First of all, a little bit of legal and background and mandate. Ever since the Treaty of Maastricht, the European Union has recognized the contribution that cooperation in health services can bring to the people of Europe, while respecting, of course, the rights of member states to decide how they will organize health services within their own national borders. And after many years of discussion, the 2011 directive on the application of patient rights in cross-border care, the so-called cross-border directive, sets out the condition under which a patient may travel to another European Union country to receive medical care and reimbursement. It covers healthcare costs, as well as the prescription and delivery of medication and medical devices, and in addition, the directive established the principle of voluntary cooperation between healthcare units in member states in allied specialized healthcare. And in particularly, Article 12 of the Cross-Border Directive established the European Reference Network in 2007 as cross-Europe virtual health provider networks aiming to facilitate discussions on complex or rare diseases that require highly specialized knowledge or treatment. What the Commission and Member States expected for the European Reference Network, that they will offer some important benefits, access to a much larger cross-border pool of expertise and knowledge, increasing the chances of receiving the best advice to diagnose and treatment, and particularly for small member states. I mean, you may remember that the directive was approved with a very strong push from small member states that wanted the quality of care to be performed in the same way everywhere in the Union, and bringing together patients and resources, enabling economies of scale for accessing treatment for the rare diseases. And actually has been a major achievement because starting from March 2017, already 24 European reference networks have been established, bringing together over 300 hospitals from 26 member states. And I will tell you later the number of member states participating in each ERN varies between 8, which is the minimum, and 19. And the number of reference centers in each member state varies between 1 and 21. And you see that this has been certainly a major success. And we have listed here the current European reference network that you see are focused on different rare diseases or different conditions. In the directives, explicitly, key features and key functions were described. So the key feature was essentially that the European reference network must fulfill criteria for implementation and evaluation, in particularly focusing on patient, being patient-centered and clinically led, and again with a minimum of 10 members in at least 8 countries, subject to robust independent third-party assessment and endorsed and approved by national authorities. These are the key features. When it comes to the key functions, the directive gave also some procedural indications. So to review a patient diagnosis and treatment, the coordinators convene a kind of virtual advisory panel of medical specialists across different disciplines. And they use a dedicated IT platform and telemedicine tool called the Clinical Patient Management System. And this allows expertise travel to the patients rather than the patient travel to the center. Again, this is very important in particular for member states. It allows sharing of expertise to diagnose, follow up, and manage patients, and facilitates a multidisciplinary approach, as well as collaboration and learning across centers of expertise and networks at national and international level. And we are talking about rare disease, in some cases undiagnosed disease. So the focus is first on diagnosis and treatment by providing tools for collaboration and virtual consultation. But of course, started as a diagnostic and tools, but very soon, as for the nature of the disease, became a very important research development activities and also a guidelines producers. And these functions support the developments of good practice and outcome measures for quality control, of course, as I said, contributing to research. So the first activity that the panel carried out was understanding what is the current knowledge about the current state of the art. So in essentially, what do we know about existing ERNs? And we can say that ERN is a new concept, started only 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago, and the knowledge and the evaluation is very limited. The operation, in some cases, just started, but we have asked two of the most established and well-working centers to undertake an in-depth interview with the coordinators, Franz Schaffer, coordinator of the European Reference Network for Rare Kidney Disease, and Marisa Tejedor-Botelho is product manager for Transplant Child, to give their overview, to give their expertise, to give their comment about what they believe has been the major benefit to their patients during these less than 2 years. And I mean, first of all, the agreement was total, and the first reply by both of them was the pooling of expertise. The pooling of expertise achieved by convening specialists in member centers and where they can come virtually together and uploading their individual cases, starting from the primary clinicians linking the panel of experts, which is selected depending on the specific expertise, and then the clinical details are reviewed. The online chat facility enables communication between the primary clinicians and the expert panel, and then a report is produced as a result of the network, providing the primary clinicians advice for patient management. And this has been shown, in the words of our colleagues, in invaluable contribution in specific cases that otherwise have been severely harmed by the fact that this patient couldn't move easily and expertise in their own countries couldn't be easily reached. But coordination of experts on rare disease has resulted in also, as I said, in development of guidelines only in this European reference network. 39 new ones were published, as well as knowledge sharing and benchmarking. The second advantage was the pooling of patients. So creating a critical mass of patients, collecting and coordinating experience in treating patients with rare conditions requiring complex treatment allows the development, of course, of an expertise, not only opinion-based, but evidence-based, and of course the starting of registries, providing a platform for research. And you are aware that the sample size required for studies can vary greatly, but in some cases, even the pooling of relatively few cases can result in new opportunities for research. And this is, again, pooling of expertise, pooling of patients has been the two major benefits for the networks. But they also underline some critical issues of this less than 2 years. They say that the referral mechanism at national and international level is not yet robust and consistent and equitable and effective and efficient as it should be. And in some cases there is a kind of adverse selection in the sense that the most advanced countries, the most advanced centers, of course, are part of the job, while the countries and the patients that are more in need are not part of them. So essentially, the referral mechanism should be much more refined in comparison of what has been done in these previous 2 years. Second issue, as was imaginable, the adequate funding. So they underline that in many centers, of course, variability is important, that in many centers, the work of the center was very much in the hands of enthusiastic clinicians and, of course, of patients in needs. But this is not something which is sustainable, even in the medium run. So essentially, a robust and coherent and consistent mechanism of funding, granting sustainability in the medium and the long term should be granted. And running this organization is a complex issue. It's something which wasn't prepared many clinicians to do, and of course they were fueled by their enthusiasm, but leading, managing, networking, budgeting, coordinating is another. It's not taught on the university, particularly to clinical doctors. It should be part of their at least postgraduate management, and of course the mechanism of governance should be seriously strengthened. And as I will tell you later, the conditions of our member states vary greatly according to the financial crisis that hit Europe since 2007. The cost effectiveness is a kind of imperative. So we cannot allow the luxury to waste resources. So even if in some cases it's important from the ethical point of view to allocate much more resources for rare diseases, the cost effectiveness, or better, the cost utility should be a criteria to be evaluated. This was their suggestions, which we fully shared. In fact, when we had to propose the dimensions of the operations of reference network to be evaluated, we discovered that even if this kind of consideration is in work in progress at the moment, because we have been told that there is among the European Reference Network a working group trying to develop indicators for the evaluation of this, we couldn't find an international, at European level dimension clearly consolidated in the evaluation of the dimensions of the operations of reference networks. So essentially we base our advice on the work which was carried out by the European Observatory on Health Systems and Policy in 2013, which was essentially evaluating European reference network, of course, at European level, but mostly at national level in member states, and underlying the importance of 5 dimensions. You can see them in the table: governance, objectives, functions, the material scope of the network, and the geographical scope of the network. And we strongly advise that this should be done for the current, but also for the future evaluation of the European reference network. So at the end of this first part, our panel essentially feels to recommend that in order to define what is an effective network, the first step is to define its mission. The mission should be clear, the mission should be clearly stated, the mission should be shared, the mission should be defined inclusively by the different geographical perspective, but a mission should be clearly stated. Second, the ability for networks to become integrated in the national healthcare system, which of course is important, otherwise we will have an increasing inequality in Europe, between countries, within countries, even within regions, because some countries have a lot of difference even in their own homeland territory. And finally, last but not least, to make this process of improving treatment and integration cost-effective. So our attention, being, you know, our panel multidisciplinary and having the kind of expertise that goes from care, from clinical care to systems analysis, but also to public health and economy, it has been important to underline the fact that every single procedure that is provided in Europe should be carefully evaluated for the value, what we can see the value, but at the moment for the cost-effectiveness evaluation. And how also we, in the opinion, you will see that we have advised in order for the ERN to be evaluated, for the ERN to achieve what are the ambitions to be achieved, which aspects need to be evaluated to define a network as successful. And again, we didn't reinvent the wheel. There is a genius of evaluation, which is Arvedis Donabedian, and we use the Donabedian's well-known structure process outcome model, which can be portrayed in 2 different ways. The first, the classical one, which is the structure, so carefully evaluating the facilities, the equipment, the staffing, the qualification, the licenses, the accreditation. We made also an example coming from a Spanish experience, which we gave quite a lot of value. Then the process, which is not only, of course, the technical care, but in particularly for rare disease, the interpersonal care, so the respect, the communication, the knowledge and information for patient that should be absolutely taken not as a marginal or incremental approach, but as a basis for the evaluation, even leading to new way of evaluating the outcome, and again, the outcome, which of course are the classical one. And this is the traditional way, but we also produce a kind of more understandable way. So when we speak about structure, we speak about how is care organized, in what context does it occur, and this could also catch some of the difficulties of the problems of particularly smaller countries that struggle to find very sophisticated equipment, very qualified staff, very, update qualification for them to be competitive. The second, the process is what is done, and this very much lead to the clinical qualification of the staff, but also to the management of the process. And finally, the outcome, which is what happens to the patient health, which ultimately is our real goal. The second question that the Commission asks is, are there other areas where European reference network might be appropriate? Shall we have the discussion at the end? So because this is the end of the first part, I hope has been clear, the prerequisite for the evaluation. The second is, there are other areas where European reference networks might be appropriate. We have seen now that one element of ERN is the exchange of knowledge and how to treat certain conditions. Without the structured system, such as the one created within ERN, so essentially the structure, the process, the outcome, the evaluation, the sharing of expertise, the pooling of patients, everything should be very much structured. In absence of such a system, it's likely that there will be variation in models of care. And that was essentially what we wanted to avoid. And you know that this variation of care, and in fact that's maybe the reason why the Commission asked us to think about this, is not confined to rare disease. Actually, every single clinical practice is very much affected by what we can call unwarranted conditions. So something which is not related to the condition of the patient, but is much more related to the professional culture, to the way in which the care is organized, funded, and produced. And the widespread variability is very much a matter of life, as it is the matter of health services. So the question was, is the approach adopted by EARN to address the issues related to care for rare disease, being this knowledge sharing and benchmarking, applicable to other sectors? We believe strongly that this implies that for every sector of clinical practice that we are thinking about, the performance of the healthcare system should be evaluated in a transparent and systematic manner. That is the ambition of Ready for Rare Disease in the ERN, in order to identify areas of best practice and those which need to be improved on. Then the result must be disclosed to the public, making the results available offers the opportunity to share best practice and increases the physician's awareness of the quality of their performance. We underline very much the importance of this. And if this has been somehow achieved, even if, of course, the process has to be substantially improved in the rare disease condition, this is certainly not achieved regularly in Europe or elsewhere in the world for other conditions. So the question then is whether the ERN model might be appropriate as a means of reducing unwarranted variation, offering a forum in which those managing different conditions could share experience. In other words, can we expand automatically this model without creating the precondition that we described? We believe that this argument is not persuasive, and it's absolutely premature for us to propose to the Commission and Member States that this should be done now. Except in small countries, there is no obvious need to create an international network to function. On the contrary, there are reports of implementation of these measures at the local and regional level with excellent results, even for common conditions. So in other words, you will see in our conclusions and recommendations, we don't see the ERN as a tool, as a mechanism for correcting this, but maybe that at national level, some ingredients of what has the formula, made the formula of ERN successful can be used. In other words, once there is a sufficient number of cases, the methods used by ERNs can be easily applied at the national, regional, or even local level, since the focus is not on gathering information per se, but rather on using the information to improve health care and increasing the amount of information available, useful only if it can change decision of treatment, which is not the case, or maybe not the case, for many of the most common conditions. Indeed, there is a need for international cooperation, but the kind of collaboration that has arisen for rare disease because the volumes are too small to gather a reliable amount of data and identify difference in quality of care is different from the solution that we can envisage to resolve, or at least to fight the unwarranted variation of the other conditions. And even if there is a desire for international collaboration, for example, to develop guidelines for complex conditions or indications for new treatment, these can often be achieved equally well by networks developed within other frameworks, for example, by European scientific and professional organizations, many of which are already engaged in such mechanisms. We are aware that most of member states do not have a coordinating mechanism to do that, but we would like more to encourage member states to develop such a mechanism rather than encouraging the ERN approach to solve these problems. A second issue is whether the ERN model can promote access to healthcare for vulnerable communities. We've been explicitly asked, when we speak about cross-border communities that are currently not adequately covered by national health services, when we speak about small countries which are far away, think about Malta and Cyprus, from the main geographical stream. If we think about remote areas, think about part of our countries which are very rural, so can we use the ERN mechanism to solve the problem of inadequate access to high-quality health care that, of course, is not limited only to rare disease? Again, we believe that this is not the case. that there are other mechanisms that can address these issues, including the now numerous example of cross-border collaboration. And it is not clear that the ERN model would add to them. So essentially, we believe that essentially this can be achieved in a different way. Again, we have been also asked to think about the increasing problem of refugees, the increasing problem of homeless people. Actually, we were shocked by figures of 150% increase in Germany of homeless people. But again, if you look at that as in a percentage, it's still 0.075%, and this is the highest number that we have. Of course, doesn't mean that we have to neglect this, but again, refugees, homeless people, and also disaster intervention, so in case of earthquake, to have collaboration. We don't believe that the ERN mechanism is the most appropriate mechanism, but we encourage the member states and European Union to optimize the care of these groups and the preparedness in provide acute responses. There are already important initiatives by the European Commission. We encourage the member states, particularly the ones that have the most severe problems of both geological and social problems, to be encouraged to do that. The current criteria for establishing a European reference network as a mean of improving the management of patients with rare and complex diseases at the hand of our analysis is appropriate, is working, is, of course, in need of further, more objective evaluation. We will say that, but the ERN concept does not address other issues raised for consideration, such as remote areas and border regions, or the development of new medicine or interventions for which we believe there are alternative and more appropriate mechanisms. Another question was about the use of the ERN model only, as I said, as I described, as a diagnostic and treatment tool, or as an additional, more open and integrated model. So in other words, if we have to add research, innovation, the generation and share of evidence, of course, as I said, the development of clinical guidelines, the training. And we believe that while it's not possible to come to definitive conclusions about the role of ERNs on this, we believe that there is a considerable scope for incorporating these additional roles beyond the immediate objective of providing advice on the individual patient. But again, there is a practical problem, there is an organizational problem, there is a management problem, there is a financial problem. Because again, we were told, and was clearly evident from the analysis, that in some of the cases in the development question, how should national health system integrate such networks into the national framework? We believe this is very important, and after all is the added value of the Union and of the collaboration between the Commission and Member States. We underline the fact that properly implemented ERNs are not an obstacle to the overall functioning of the national healthcare system. Indeed, the added value of ERN is evident as long as the focus is on information and knowledge exchange, and as long as the patient is only treated in the foreign system when it is appropriate and justified. As my friend Martin McKee says, patients don't like to move for an appendicitis. They want to be treated at home. And when they have to move for reasonable way. And this way, of course, should be effectiveness, efficiency, equity, humanity, and of course, as we are facing a time of scarce resources, cost effectiveness. And at this point, it's important to consider, and again, this is something which is very much clear in the words of every actors of the current system of DRN, that the financial sustainability is a challenge, particularly in light of constraints facing some national health system. In fact, the opinion that people tend to move only when they have really to move, when they need to move, is the fact that cross-border healthcare in the European Union is something which is regarding only 5% of the EU citizens that obtain treatment abroad. It's something increasing, but the fear, I remember the fear of many member states when the directive was approved of an influx, of a kind of exodus of patients, even didn't happen even in neighboring countries. You can imagine from countries which are far away. But the optimal way to finance ERNs in the medium-long terms, again, remain unsolved. As I highlighted above, further elaboration will be needed to achieve long-term sustainability. And this issue may be a problem, can be a problem for every member state, but is certainly a problem for some of the member states that rather than increasing their health budget, according to the financial crisis, drop the budget, substantially cut the budget. There is, you see on the left part of the graph of the figure, a substantial number of European countries that rather than increasing, drop their budget. And this, of course, raises additional concern about the long-term sustainability of the ERNs. Finally, the ERN model could usefully be applied within a national system or even a regional section of a health system, particularly in countries that have a devoluted way of managing when dealing with common disease. So in other words, don't use the ERN model per se, but use the feature, the functions, the advantages of the ERN at national, regional, and local level. And indeed, in some cases, the application of the ERN model does not need a new dimension. It might be translated with equal or higher effectiveness to a national or regional dimension. And we then, at the last part, in the very last part of our opinion, released and proposed a set of criteria for creating a European network. So first, the condition intervention must be rare, however defined. Second, the condition must occur throughout large parts of the EU. Third, the condition must be complex and there must be incomplete knowledge, benefit from consultation among specialists. And fourth, the establishment of a ERN should only be undertaken when there is no existing alternative mechanism to obtain access to relevant expertise or other forms of collaboration, or where a simpler solution is not possible. So the conclusion and recommendation is that the establishment of ERNs appears to have been, at least potentially, among the most important European cooperative initiatives for decades. We really value that. We really believe that the Parliament, the Commission, the Member States that supported that made the right thing at the right time. But the extension of the ERN model to disease other than rare disease is currently considered premature. The application of the ERN model as a whole or part of the model will depend on the needs to which the model is expected to respond in fields other than rare disease. So there is scope, but you have to evaluate very carefully, and of course not only from the technical but also from the financial point of view. And last but not least, we recommend that well-designed independent research is carried out on the impact of ERN on healthcare of rare disease, including the clinical, the scientific, the social aspects, the adaptation that may be needed in order to fit the ERN model to diseases other than the rare diseases. And finally, the implementation of ERN for rare diseases as well as for other conditions require the availability of trained professionals at all levels of care. Now, we are speaking about digital health. I mean, you are very fashionable if you pronounce the word big data, genomics, blockchain. At the end of the day, is an interaction between two persons, a patient and the doctors. And we have to be aware that both of them have to be trained somehow. And of course, the ones that remain under our responsibility, most of our medical academics, have to be trained appropriately to this new challenge. So in other words, the lessons learned from ERNs should be reported and disseminated in ways that can fit into the undergraduate and the postgraduate and the professional education of healthcare professionals. Otherwise, of course, you will have a kind of models, but you won't have the people to do that. And we believe that people comes first. Even if they are clinicians or patients, they come first. And I hope, of course, the opinions is much more than that. But for the sake of your time, I discuss only the most important issues. But of course, feel free to ask any questions if I've not been clear enough to clarify your doubts. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Walter. So what I will now do is hand over to the chair of our panel, Jan de Mazner, who will moderate the subsequent discussion, the questions from you. And while you're asking questions, and we'll try to answer them, Sabina and Walter and myself will be taking notes so that we can see what, if anything, we need to change or modify in the report. So Jan, please, over to you. And if everyone, when they do speak, could you please clarify who you are and who you're representing so that we can have a better idea and we can reflect that in any changes that we make? That's really very important. Topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Walter, and thank you very much, Martin. On my tour, it's a pleasure to welcome you and to thank you for investment of your time and attention to be here and to participate in this hearing. For the sake of technology, you will only be captures of what you are saying. It will only be captured if you speak into that microphone. And the advice is always you have to eat the microphone so that everything goes in clearly. May I also ask you to stand up when you speak? And as Martin already said, give your background so that for the report we can really allocate your intervention to the person and you are and the function you have. I would like to suggest that first we have a round of questions for clarification on the different elements that have been presented. And then in a second round, we are going to collect your views. Speak open. This is a moment for us to not only to check if what we wrote in the opinion is appropriate, but also to collect additional views, complementary elements that come up, so that we can enrich the document and make it more relevant when we go over to the final format in the forthcoming days and weeks, so that we can put that on the website then and make available for all those that can be interested. So the floor is open. Let's first have a round of clarification questions, and then we invite you to formulate your additional views and elements of reflection. Who is going to start? Please speak loudly in the microphone and present yourself.
Hello, it's Joanna Psalti. I'm representing the Ophthalmology Societies of Europe. The organization is European Alliance for Ophthalmology and Vision Research. The question is, how open is the referral system at the moment in terms of the patients? Because I've got ophthalmologists who, for example, they don't even know about the ERNI, which is the European Reference Network for the eye diseases. And because you talked about the pathways for national referrals, when it's not known, presumably whether there is a path or not is also a problem. But it's not very clear from reading the opinion whether the project is still at a piloting stage, they still only want to look at their own patients of the centers, or they're actually open to other submissions.
Thank you for that question. I suggest that we pick a few questions and then we can give some combined answers, because that helps us to cluster a little bit and to make the process more efficient. So other question for clarification, we will certainly pick that point that you raised, that's very important. Other questions for clarification, or was it clear? Yes, please.
So, my name is Helen Brewer from the European Society of Anesthesiology. My question is, you concluded that the model wouldn't apply to more common diseases, but I'm wondering whether it's still an open question as to whether the ERN model could apply to things like more rare events or interventions, such as in anesthesiology, I don't know, allergic reactions in anesthetic procedures, or rare conditions such as malignant hypothermia.
Thank you very much. Other questions for clarification? If not, we can start with those two elements. I think they address two different aspects. If I listen well to the first question, it's also a question about where are we now, and also you need a chain. And of course, a chain is as performant as the weakest of the steps in the chain. I think that was also underlying your question. So maybe Martin?
Yeah, on both, I'll pick up both questions maybe. The first thing is that we're very clear that we cannot evaluate the existing ERNs. It's too early to say. And the issue that you raise is an important one which will need to be looked at within the scope of the evaluation. We do pick up a few points that we can already comment on. So the fact is that not every member state is represented in every ERN. That's an obvious challenge. But the nature of the ERNs is such that they are a voluntary grouping of organisations. They don't have a statutory basis so that every member state has to be represented. And in fact, given the principle of subsidiarity, if the member states were told that they had to do that, I think there would be considerable objection from them. This is within the limitations of the treaty, which is that the Commission has a role in facilitating cooperation but not imposing it. So that is a nature, that is logical consequence of the nature of the treaties, plus the fact that we are still at a very early stage. Does that answer your question on?
Yeah, I think that my question was also more, it's not about whether the member state is a member of the ERN, yeah, it's not so much of that, but for example, a member state who is not a member of the ERN, can they submit a patient case to be reviewed?
Well, as far as I'm aware, they can. There's nothing to stop them from doing it, but
there
it's the centres. But they need to develop a mechanism with a centre that is, because under the directive on cross-border care, there's no reason why they cannot actually develop a relationship with another centre.
Okay, so it is up to.
As far as I'm aware, anyway, it's theoretically it is possible to do. Okay. But the difficulty, of course, as you I think are highlighting, is that there will not be the expertise to participate in every member state in every ERN. But the principle set out in the directive to facilitate collaboration clearly would make that possible, but it would have to be done through, it could be done, there is a basis for doing it.
Okay, yeah, what was not clear is whether the ERNs are closed to the cases, like the online patient platform that they've got. It's only for their own patients at the moment.
No, it's not.
That is not, okay, and that is not actually widely known. I think that's...
Yeah, but again, that is up to the ERNs to make it. Well, we're not evaluating them, but Sabina, do you want to?
What I could just add that you said this very important comment regarding that a lot of clinicians don't even know that the ERN are working. And this is why it's so difficult now to evaluate how the ERN are working. And also, we had the opportunity to see that countries worked in a very different way. Walter was saying, for example, that Spain put in place a very strict way of classifying who could be referral networks and what should be the relationship between that hospital, that group of clinicians, a specialist, with the rest of the country. Other countries didn't do this, or they're still discussing how to find out who is really the referral center. So this has made it complicated. In some countries, is or because they're small, or because they have a good sharing professional community that already is discussing rare disease and has a network at the local level. It's quite easy to know that if you have a problem with a patient, you know where you have to do to send him at the national level and then in the ERN. In some other countries, this is not still there. It's not there, and so it's complicated for the clinicians to know where they should send their patient.
Thank you.
I think maybe this is something that is maybe not for us, but actually for everyone in this room, because the ERNs are yet another example of an exceptionally valuable contribution by the European Union in health, and they underline the importance of Europe in improving the health of all European citizens. But regrettably, in a number of member states, people are unaware of that. And I would hope that everybody here that has a presence in those member states could advertise and promote the role that the European Union has in improving the lives of patients. This is just one of very many examples, but everybody needs to say it, and patient organisations in particular need to be much more vocal about the advantages of Europe. Can I pick up the issue about anesthesiology? You raise an interesting issue because, of course, the examples that you picked up, allergic reactions and malignant hyperthermia and so on, these are problems that are emergencies. And the mechanism by which the ERN works, where the patients are referred for advice, and it would take, I mean, the timing is simply not going to work. However, there are many other mechanisms, and you in anesthesiology in Europe, in terms of developing curricula, shared curricula and ideas, have actually done a huge amount in terms of working together across borders. So I think that there are opportunities to look at other mechanisms, either through research projects or even simply there's a whole range of instruments that could be used to get support for funding, and but even within your own resources, I think there are plenty of opportunities. But we don't see that the ERN as constituted would be that particular mechanism. And I think that comes back to a lot of these issues. We're not saying that these things shouldn't be done. In fact, they all should be done, almost certainly, be they help supporting people who are homeless or refugees or civil disasters and so on. It's just that the ERN is a particular mechanism with particular criteria and particular processes that deal with certain issues, and it's not clear how that would be extrapolated elsewhere. But all of these other things could well be done. It's just the ERN we cannot see as the mechanism for doing that. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think things like creating learning communities in certain disciplines and making sure then that all countries, also the so-called smaller countries, are involved. I think that's our professional responsibility and accountability to make the knowledge available to the clinicians of every European member state. Thank you. Let's open up the floor to the issues of comments, reflections, feedback, whatever you wanted to add or to contradict that's in the opinion that we formulated. So the floor is open to your viewpoints. Please, we start here and then we go in the back.
Thank you. Ines Hernando from Eurordis, Rare Disease Europe, so representing the voice of rare disease patients. First of all, I'd like to compliment for their opinion. I think you really, touched into all, the topics, and everything that's in there is really relevant, and I really liked it. The only thing, and it was because of your presentation now I have picked up that it's a bit. So you were mentioning that both the coordinator that you interviewed, the Franz Schaeffer, the ECNAC coordinator, and Marisa from Transplant Child, they were saying that, on their opinion, the two main benefits of these networks are the CPMS, so patients being able to be diagnosed through the system, and the ability to pull data. So those were the two things that emerged there, to pull health data. So I think that if you would have asked, not only those, expertise, okay. Because if you would have asked us, so the patient community that's involved in there, by the way, here we have one of the patients that's more involved into one of the ERNs. I think that the CPMS and diagnosis we think is important, but we cannot limit ERNs to that, because then we would have failed clearly. Because those are really rare cases that will go there. So that's a very small number. It will always be a small number. So that's why integration into national health systems is so important. And for us patients, it's more important what they will bring in terms of guidelines, recommendations for better care, recommendations for integrated care, not only multidisciplinary care, but also integrated care for these patients that have chronic diseases. Registries. So if you would have asked us, maybe it would have come, another picture would have emerged. I mean, those two things are important, of course. And another thing that I think it's really important is, and it's it's there. I mean, you have mentioned it, but is the training of these experts. So the training, the potential for training, this very small number of experts, and maintaining the capability in the systems and the sustainability is critical. I have lots of other comments, but I don't want to go on and on. But thank you for the report, and yeah, very, very interesting.
Maybe we collect some other reactions and then we come back to the panel. Yes, please. And then, oh no, we had first the man in the back. Sorry, my fault. And then you come in later on.
Thanks, Jan. Pascal Garel, the European Hospital and Healthcare Federation. So I have many biased because most of the hospitals involved in the RN are members of our members. We have been involved with all of this also in the design of some components of the evaluation of this. And I'm afraid I have only positive comments to make, so it's not very nice to advance the topic. We were very surprised that the Commission asked you, actually, and the Commission left, but asked you for this because it's a very early stage, and positively surprised because finally there's a lot to be said about this. We liked, in particular in the first part, that really clearly showed the difficulties with the referral mechanism. And we said that early in the process of the discussion, even before the directive, that there would be a problem here in general, not only for rare disease, but you pointed out this very well, as well as the integration of national health system. And I want to say that also to Jan, who is the specialist in primary care. We cannot have systems in isolation to the rest of the hospital where they are and the rest of the healthcare system in which they are. And you point that out. It's very important to remind this because, yes, some doctors don't know about that. Most doctors don't know about that, let's say, at this stage. And also other healthcare professionals. That's also important to mention. There's something that will also be on the governance of ERN, one of the first main issue, which is the Brexit. We all know there are 6 leaders. No, but that's important. There are 6 leaders of ERN. We have pointed out to the Commission several times as a group of European stakeholders. But it's not only the leadership of those 6 ERN, it's also the other members. And no answer. There is no answer from any institution, and we understand why, but that's also a key issue. How the governance will handle this main point. And then the second part, interestingly, originally us, the European Hospital and Healthcare Federation, before the directive, we were very much in favor of not closing the door to a non-rare disease. And we even fighted in the discussions to have other disease included. And I think it's wise to say today that it's nice we didn't do it. Because we see how complex it is for rare disease to get together, and it was a hell of a job, and since he's outside of the room, we can say there's a lot of work done by Enrique Terol to merge different subgroups of rare disease together, and that's important. So yeah, it's wise actually not to go outside. So I really like the way you approach this second question, or the main second question of the Commission is, yes, maybe it's too early to know, and maybe it will forever be too early to have the same mechanism. There certainly are others, and you pointed out the work of the European Observatory. There are already things happening at national, regional, European level for non-rare disease. We could learn from that, and certainly we would be in favor of that. And to conclude, we think it's a very good report also to evaluate the ERN. Although again, it's very early to know what is going to happen, but it's also a good way also to continue the discussion in the later years to come when this will be back on the agenda of the European Union. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. And in order not to forget the important contributions, may I invite the panel now to already react, and then we come back to you for the next question.
No, a very small reaction. Thank you for your comments. Thinking about your comment regarding patient participation, and I think this is really very important. And perhaps what we could add to our opinion, it's to push a little bit more the idea that the ERNs should have public reporting, benchmarking, so that we can know more and the public can know more. And on this topic regarding the communication process, I think this is a very relevant issue, because the idea that the clinicians and patient association in some countries don't even know that the European Commission is working on this, I think is one of the points that we should improve, considering that the comments also that of Walter's, really the European Commission is doing a lot on this, and a lot of people don't even know. So I think that we could add this to our opinion. Is not underlined as much as we could. I think we could do something more there.
So for us, microphone, please.
All stakeholders all stakeholders are doing a lot in terms of raising awareness. And when I say all, it's the Commission, clinicians, and patient organizations. So all our national federations are pushing their governments. We are missing a decisive support from member states, and we know it's because we don't have evidence. So clearly, this is like a circle. We need the evidence so that they buy in. That's it. But the one stakeholder that needs to do a little bit more in terms of awareness raising is member states. If they're not doing it and they're, stepping back a bit, it's because they have their reasons. Yeah. I'll leave it there.
This public reporting helps.
Maybe I could just come in and link it to something that Pascal said. We did not talk about Brexit for the simple reason that we are waiting for the British Cabinet to decide what they want out of Brexit. And until the Cabinet decides, and then subsequently the government and the Parliament then tell the rest of Europe what they want, it's pointless to try to speculate because it changes every day. So I think we park that. But maybe I'd just link that to your point, because you were saying that it was the member states need to do things. If I can step aside a bit and look at a piece of work that I've been doing recently, looking at what patient organisations in the United Kingdom have said about the European Union, they have been almost entirely silent. It is very difficult to find anything that has been said. So I think unless people in Europe, be they professional bodies, and many of the professional bodies in the UK have not said much either, and the patient organisations are willing to speak out about the advantages of European collaboration, we can hardly expect the ordinary health professionals and the patients to know. And I can share our work with you. It's been striking how, even in the face of looming shortages of insulin, for example, some of the diabetes organisations seem reluctant to speak out.
Yes, please. Take the floor.
Charissa Frank from bindweefsel.be. I'm also from the ERN RECONNECT. I'm a patient advocate, or an EPAG advocate, as we would say. If I can pick in further on what Ines has said, as patient advocates, we are very much involved. It's different from ERN to ERN. In RECONNECT, we are very much involved with the steering in the steering committee, of which I happen to be a member of, and also in decision-making process. But we are also involved in. You said we are not. We are also involved with actively even finding HCPs in countries where there are no HCPs. We are actively involved in getting also patient organizations aware. We are actively involved in the diseases that we represent in our ERN, to find patient organizations in the countries, to identify them, and also to raise awareness. The only thing is, we don't have the appropriate funding always to do that, because we are patient organizations and we are we do it on our own free time, and we have we contact these patient organizations, and they are usually the problem is the language problem. First of all, because if we're talking about Romania or those kind of countries, those are just usually the ones that we are missing.
Thank you for this information. I would like, in order not to lose contributions, that somebody reflects from the panel on what was said in the backstage about hospital and primary care and how this should be integrated in the whole process. Now, I think that was an important remark. Martin, you can comment.
I think what many of you are saying is, what we all agree, that there is a need to integrate these within national health systems, but that is not something that the European Commission can do. That is clearly a responsibility of member states under the treaty. And so therefore I think patient groups, hospital groups and others can advocate for that at national level. But there are problems, as has already been picked up, within some member states that you cannot even refer patients from one part of the country to another. And that is not something that can be solved at a European level. That has to be addressed within the individual member states.
May add to that, you can visit 2 neighboring countries and look at the way certain rare problems like melanoma of the retina are treated. And you see in the one country that there are 10 centers, that every center has 10 patients, something like that. And in the neighboring country, there is 1 center where the 100 patients are treated with the most advanced therapies. And that's just nearby. And that's the situation, of course, which is for the patient, from the patient's point of view, inequitable, because it depends on the country, the level of expertise that you can access in your own country. So I think that's also points that can be taken into account. I think it's now the lady over there. Present yourself.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'm Lavinia Meloni and I work for Weber Shandwick. And I wanted to share with you a reflection I had, for example, was first of all reading the title, Expanding the ERN Beyond Rare Diseases. First of all, at the very first moment I thought, okay, but maybe the Commission should start thinking about how to best exploit the potential of ERNs that is still there, but is not fully exploited. And I start thinking about what in my mind was the points to be improved, and I'm happy that some of them are reported through the coordinator opinions in your report. For example, how to best improve the referral at national level, because the ERN link a center of excellence, but yet the people that most need an optimal referral are left behind nowadays, so good. Another important thing is how member states are going to reimburse cross-border healthcare. So a person and a patient that has been taken in charge in between 8 countries, how the doctors are going to bill this time, even with the creation of guidelines. But there is a point that I didn't see mentioned. For example, have you considered in your internal discussion how to engage with the industry, the private sector? Are you going to develop a policy of engagement with the industry? Because I guess this would increase transparency to shed light, because what has not been regulated or addressed, maybe it remains in the shadow. So thanks.
Can I ask the panelists to react?
Well, I think the billing is not a problem, because we have the directive on cross-border care and it sets out the mechanisms that can be used. Now, that is just a matter for member states to use those mechanisms. It's all set out very clearly. And as for working with industry, that's a matter for member states. I mean, there are private providers in many member states, and that is not a matter that the European Commission can have any role in, because it's precluded explicitly by the treaties. So, but maybe I'm misunderstanding something.
Because in my job, we have entered into contact. So these are some internal insight from people working with the ERN. So some ERN coordinators, people that get engaged, ask what is the policy of getting engaged with these external stakeholders. So we have been asked the Commission to explain how the ERN representative could engage with the industry, but we didn't receive any answer. So maybe, as you said, it's because it's beyond their remit, but we didn't receive any reply. But
I mean, I'm obviously misunderstanding, but I mean, I would have thought a modern, I mean, Pascal can answer to this, but a modern hospital will be engaging with industry all the time. Every time it buys a new scanner, every time it buys pharmaceuticals, going to employment agencies, it's engaging with industry 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And but engaging for what? Sorry, again, maybe you could help me as to what the engagement. What are you trying to achieve?
Yeah. So the board of member states published a statement like some years ago, saying very clearly that ERNs couldn't be funded by industry. So funding by industry is not allowed within the ERN to avoid any contamination, sort of to say. So that's that's a board of member states statement. So they have that, they can look at that, and the coordinators know that very well. But as you were saying, because hospitals engage on a daily basis with industry, and we're having clinicians driving these networks, clinicians are asking, can we engage with industry to develop clinical trials within the ERNs? And this is something that hasn't been answered yet, and it's a pity that the Commission is not here to address this. But this is a big, it's a big issue. They have.
I mean, these people are going to be talking together anyway. I'm really not understanding why they wouldn't be able to do that, because how could you stop it? I mean, if people from any, of course, remember, most of the time patients are not moving. It's the information and the patients that are moving. Yeah. But why, because
I think that the idea is to put a hat on top of this clinical trial.
So what you're saying is you want to.
That is done by the.
So you want to. You want
because you know the you've heard from the clinicians that you've interviewed that one of the issues is funding, right? Funding came up as a problem all the time.
Yeah.
So they're looking, outside the Commission and outside the member states for funding, and when they look, what is it that they find? They find industry, but they need rules to get industry money into the ERNs. You cannot.
But all of the hospitals involved will have their own rules for engaging with industry. What's different?
As an ERN, so as a network, they cannot get that money.
But they can do it individually.
They can do it individually, but then it's really a pity that Enrique is not here. They can do it individually, but they cannot, and they can run their trials, and they're doing
which they do. I mean, virtually all of the, if you're clinically sophisticated enough to be part of an ERN, you're going to be engaging in numerous clinical trials. These are leading academic medical centres across Europe, so they're all going to be involved in clinical trials.
Yeah, but they will not be able to label any results as an ERN finding.
Well, I mean, sorry, am I missing something? What's the point of doing that?
I think I've said enough.
No, but I mean, if you
but we can.
I tried. Can I say something beyond the conventional? So, if I understand well, the problem is that sometimes industry wants to use the label of the ERN as a kind of, sponsor for marketing after all the results of the trial. You know what I mean? So essentially, and the attitude, of course, by the Commission is not to mix the label of the ERN as a public endeavor with the private. And this is not managed. So essentially, even now in the planning of the next budget for research has been very much discussed about these two streams of public and private, and still in most of the countries, and as far as I understand also at the European Commission, still there is reluctance to make this clearly available to private companies to label their initiatives as part of a public endeavor. This is the state of the art. Enrique maybe they can say something more, but essentially, in some member states, of course, sensitivities toward these issues is much higher in comparison with others which are more open. But as far as I know, it's not. It's possible from the. Sure. But putting the label, on the ERN as far as I know, is not yet possible.
I'm just struggling to know what is the benefit for patients. But if you can be specific about the benefit for patients, then
the benefit for patients is no. For us, the thing is, we want the ERNs to be sustainable. We want to have clear rules of, you know, engagement with industry on at this level, because if there are no rules, it will happen anyway, as you were saying. It's happening. We know it's happening, but there's no transparency around what's going on.
But there's nothing to stop any company setting up a network of its own, but just not calling them ERNs. I'm really struggling. I mean, if some wealthy philanthropist wants to come in and say, I'm going to create something, although I'm going to call them networks of reference in Europe, for example, which would not be European reference, they can do it. There's nothing to stop them from doing it.
But the thing with the European reference networks is that you have already all the experts there. There's no experts outside. You know, your experts are here, and your patients are here. You have a great, you know, it's a great laboratory, it's a great thing for not only for clinical trials, also for digital health, you name it. I mean, this is.
And I think it's always good that we are open to this kind of confrontation of ideas. As an outsider, I would say it will not be, from a scientific point of view, so easy to create a needed standardization to do clinical trials in patients that are so varied, and very often it's the complexity that makes the patient case more complicated, because those patients very often also have not only one condition, but there are concomitant conditions, so it would be very difficult, I think, to do large trials. But that's the view of an outsider in this thing, and we should always try, I think, to scientifically be sound also in the way we approach this. Just as a comment. Anyway, there was, please, reaction over there.
Yeah, thank you for the very comprehensive report. My name is Vinciane Quedbach from the European Brain Council, and I have a question just in following up the discussion on the economics, I would say. I think that considering the low prevalence and the complexity of these rare diseases, there would be, I think, some arguments on economic scale to be developed, and definitely on cost effectiveness analysis of some of those interventions. We know that not all countries can actually take care of all the patients with those rare diseases, and I think that what is actually also pointed out in the presentation is, and it is actually an added value, is that collaboration can be established among neighboring countries to establish collaboration, but not only collaboration for clinical trials, but also with regard to reimbursement. So that means that it's, in a way, it should be also integrated in the expenditures, that somehow for a country to enter in such collaboration is of added value for the national system. And then a second point I would like to make is also, you also say that there is a insufficient integration of ERNs into the national systems, health systems. But also, a couple of years ago, countries were invited to adopt policies on rare diseases, and I was wondering whether there would be, or some space actually on research and evaluation and so forth for ERNs inside of those policies. And because we know that when we adopt policies at country level, we also have to translate those policies into legislation and also particular directives for hospitals and expertise centers. So just two thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these reflections. The first was about, it's nice to have a diagnosis, but if you have not the resources, or you belong to a country where the resources for therapy are not available, well, the advantage of the situation is unclear.
There are lots of mechanisms. I mean, again, I would refer back to the Directive on Cross-Border Care. So if a country does not have the capacity, or maybe you're in an isolated border area and the capacity is over the border, you just use it. I mean, we look across in the Pyrenees, you've got a hospital that's shared between France and Spain. You've got a town, a city, Nova Gorica. Gorica is shared between Slovenia and Italy, where they share facilities. Valka Varga, the twin cities across Estonia and Latvia, cross-border care in Ireland, patients being sent from Malta to Italy and the United Kingdom, deliveries of babies between Dinant and Namur, between Belgium and France. The southern part of the Netherlands getting care from Belgium. I mean, there are loads of examples where the treatment can be arranged across Europe, and I'm sure there are many more. Orthopedic surgery between Romania and Hungary. One could go on, almost forever. So the mechanisms are there, but that's not a European research network, a European reference network. The European reference network is to refer someone for a diagnosis. The treatment, there are lots. There's a very clear European mechanism for doing that, which works quite well. Maybe it could work better, but this comes back to the point that people, the citizenry of Europe, need to be advised more about the enormous benefits that the European Union makes for their health. Because as we've seen in a number of the fact that people, many of whom are older people and who are the most likely to need health care, seem to think that the European Union is in some way opposing them or attacking them, even though it is there to actually benefit them. And if we don't get that message out, then we're hardly going to get a message to them that actually they have opportunities to benefit from healthcare. On the research, again, there's a Horizon 2020. There are lots of... we shouldn't look to the European reference networks to do everything. They do a particular job, and the European Union has actually provided lots of other mechanisms to do all of these other things, which is fantastic. We just need to celebrate it a bit more.
Is that the answer to your questions? Yes, thank you. Please.
I will stay into the economic...
Why don't you repeat your name, because
I'm Ioana
for the
Psalti,
process.
representing the European Alliance for Vision Research and Ophthalmology, and also the European Glaucoma Society. Basically, it's all the ophthalmologists across Europe. What I'd like to to propose, if I may, is can we have the ERNs proactivity increased, not only in terms of campaigning for what they stand for, but also creating synergies with existing projects, particularly EU funding projects. An example I'll give you is the registries. There is a lot of EU funding as an investment to create disease registries. And when I read the opinion, there was also a question that there is a lot of enthusiasm within the ERNs to create again, more registries. Can they not explore synergies with those instruments that are already there? It will maximize the investment already from the EU, but it will also, there'll be an already made registry there that they can pull out rare cases and perhaps compare them, this retrospective analysis, and then add the new ones. I don't know how possible this is. I don't know what the different interests are, but this is one thing. And the other one is whether there is any communication channel from the ERNs to the, each member state, or most of them, have got official centers for registration of rare diseases. That's for obtaining the benefits on the social system. I wonder whether a communication channel can be open to them. I know that the ERNs are about diagnosis, but once you're diagnosed, you have to refer back to those official centers. And perhaps these kind of communication channels can also proactively, in a way, increase the profile of the ERNs.
Thank you very much.
Well, of course, every member state has a focal point for the Directive on Cross-Border Care, and it's on the European Commission's website with links to the particular office in the member state, and there is absolutely no reason why the hospitals in the ERNs shouldn't connect to that. I mean, you can't make people connect. And sorry, just remind me of the first point again. It was the... Sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It was the synergies with already existing EU funded projects, which are the registries.
And of course, there are many registries which are EU funded and many that are not. So much cancer registration is not. It's funded by national... Now, if I was speaking personally, which I might do just for a second, when I've spoken to my colleagues in the Commission, I've advocated that we should have a single Europe-wide system for data collection, rather like the CDC in the United States and the Health and Human Services. But unfortunately, that's precluded by the treaties. And the consequence at the minute is that the Europe-wide surveys, like the Survey of Income and Living Conditions, is essentially taking data from national surveys, so the questions are not always identical. And then clearly I'm not speaking on behalf of the European Union here, and unfortunately I'm in a country that's about to commit national suicide, but that's beside the point. But I would say there is a very strong argument for individual citizens for saying, wouldn't it be good that we had consistency in all of this? But unfortunately that's not the way the treaties are written.
Other questions, reflections, comments, viewpoints? Feel free. Yes, please.
So, Helen Brewer again, European Society of Anesthesiology. Can you just place this exercise in the context of existing ERNs and what is going to happen with them in the future? How does this exercise that you've just done impact how existing ERNs might develop?
Okay.
Not one for us, I'm afraid. You need to direct that at the people who make the decisions, which are your members of the European Parliament and your national government sitting in the Council of Ministers. I think that will be the, am I right? Because much though it would be great if we did make the decisions, because we'd like to think we'd make rather good decisions, we're not the people who do.
Our task is to formulate opinions, we collect evidence, we add our opinions to that, we share that with you, and we publish that. But beyond that, I think our task is limited to that. Okay. We got everything we wanted to ask this afternoon? Yes, please.
Thank you.
Present yourself, please.
Yes.
Okay.
My name is Dalma Fabian, and I'm from FEANZA, the European Federation of Homeless Organizations. And since I didn't want to take up your time, but since time allows us, I would like to thank you for considering the application of the ERN model to improve the access to healthcare for homeless people. And I would just like to ask you if you can just briefly summarize the discussions you had around this issue, because one of your recommendations of setting up a learning community to improve access for homeless people in Europe could be very useful for our work, and your advice would be very helpful for us. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, thanks for this question, because we took that point seriously, as already been said by Walter in the report. And Martin, can you add on that?
And you raise a very important point. We know that the life expectancy of people who are homeless is up to 20 years less than those who are not. And this is an increasing problem in a number of member states. However, we could not see what added value a European reference network would have, but we clearly recognise the problem. You'll have seen work like the paper in The Lancet recently by Rob Aldridge, you're familiar with, by wearing another hat. I'm on the steering group for that project, so we're very aware of the challenges involved. And we would just hope that you and the organisations you represent would do what you can to support that and make the case. But this is not the mechanism for doing it, but we're hugely sympathetic to the issues that you raise, and to raise awareness of the fact that people are dying on a large scale because of the inability to build houses for the people of Europe.
So, in summary, our suggestion to build a learning community around that is not by saying this is not an important issue, but by trying to find ways where really the awareness, but also the expertise and the knowledge about what works and what is efficient in terms, and the whole debate about housing first, that you are very familiar with it, is one of those aspects. But to really put that into those that are involved and your organizations to make the point and to collect the evidence so that we can better help and advise countries on the way they can respond to those challenges. Okay. Are there other final reflections? If not, I want to hand over to the wrap-up.
Yeah, so in that case, we've been taking copious notes, and we will look at our report in the light of what you've said. I've been trying to pick out the key, anything that we might want to look at again. I think in many cases it's a matter of emphasis rather than anything fundamentally different. And I think you're saying, but maybe more loudly than we said, but we don't disagree, that these networks, first of all, we were not there to evaluate the networks. We were very clear. It's too early to do that. But you make a very valid point, and it's one that we make in the report too. These need to be well integrated with national health systems. That is a matter for the national health systems. That is not a matter for anybody in Brussels. And if anybody in Brussels was to tell the member states how to do that, a number of governments would be very quickly saying that's none of your business. But clearly in facilitating learning and knowledge and the elements that the Commission can do within the treaties, there is a case for encouraging, and maybe we can do that as well, to share best practices and to think about that. And that actually has an implication which goes beyond what we can talk about, but it highlights, and maybe I would again put this back to many of you, it highlights the need to advocate strongly in the discussions about the European research agenda for strong health systems research in Europe, because at the minute the research on integration of services, if we look at the literature, is really dominated by work in a small number of countries. It's not widespread. So if you can make clear to your research councils and to the organizations you work with the need to do locally contextually sensitive research which will highlight this, because integrating services even within the 4 countries of the United Kingdom is different, and it will be different across Europe as to how you do that. Some very imaginative things we can find in many countries, but not necessarily can be extrapolated to elsewhere. We do talk about the role of the ERNs in guidelines, in integration registries and so on. I mean, it's there, and we agree that all of this should be done. But again, much of this is about member states' responsibilities. It's not, the ERNs themselves cannot do that. They are individual networks of hospitals. They're not ministries of health. The point that they should be liaising with the focal points for the Cross-Border Care Directive, I think is clearly a valid one, that everybody is talking to one another. What I think we need to maybe stress a little bit more, and maybe something we took for granted because all of us work at a European level. Many of us on the panel have been immersed in the discussions on the European Directive on Cross-Border Care. I wouldn't say we know it by heart, but we're very familiar with both the legal text, the law on the books, and the operation of it, the law on the streets. I think what has been clear from the questions today is that not everybody else is as familiar with it as we are. This was a very difficult piece of legislation to get into onto the books. There were a lot of concerns by member states, by different organisations. It is there. It provides a very strong mechanism for doing many of the things that you're asking to be done, and we would simply say, make use of it. It's there. It is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for patients and for health professionals. And I think a big message, and as I say, if I can speak personally, I come from a country where politicians were able to persuade people to vote to leave the European Union because they thought it would improve their health, painting numbers on the side of a bus, which is exactly the opposite of what will happen. All of us, whoever we are, have a responsibility to make it clear to the people we represent that the European Union is a powerful force for better health in Europe, and if you don't do it, you'll lose it.
I would like to thank you all. Thank you, the panelists. Thank you, Rapporteur and Chair, for the contribution. But thanks to all of you for your commitment, because the fact that you are here and you invest time to discuss the conditions that people with rare diseases, that can help people with rare diseases to improve their situation, I think it's really something we appreciate fundamentally. For those who have to travel, have safe travels, and for those who are in Fan Club. On the 13th of November, we have the next hearing, and that will be on digitalization. It will be in the morning of the 13th of November, somewhere in Brussels. Was it okay?